I froze in the doorway of my son's living room, my hands still gripping the small gift bag I'd brought for their new house. Laughter echoed through the room, sharp and cruel, bouncing off the polished walls. My son's wife, Melissa, was sitting on the couch, her legs crossed like she owned the entire place, a glass of wine in her hand. And then I heard it. Her voice, clear and loud enough for the neighbours to hear. "How does it feel to be a loser?" My chest tightened. The air left my lungs. She was laughing at me. At me, the woman who raised her husband, who gave him everything I could, and who had quietly paid for the very house she was sitting in. My son Jacob sat next to her, silent, his face caught somewhere between shame and discomfort. His eyes flicked to me for a second and then away, like he couldn't bear to meet my gaze. Melissa tilted her head, smiling like a cat playing with a mouse. "Seriously," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. "It must be so hard knowing everyone else has moved on in life and you haven't. You're just stuck. No career, no status, just sad." For a second I couldn't even move. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears. My hands trembled, but I kept my face calm. I had spent my whole life swallowing insults, pretending I didn't hear whispers behind my back. But that night, something in me snapped. I walked fully into the room, set the gift bag on the table and smiled. A slow, steady smile that made her laughter stutter for just a second. "How does it feel to know," I said softly, "that this so-called loser won't be paying your bills anymore?" Her face froze. The laughter died instantly. I could see the colour drain from her cheeks, like someone had just yanked the rug out from under her perfect little world. Jacob's head jerked toward me, eyes wide. "Mum?" "What are you talking about?" he said, his voice cracking. I turned to him, my smile still there, but sharper now. "I'm saying," I said, "that the woman you're letting laugh at me, mock me in my own son's house, has no idea who's been keeping your lights on." Melissa blinked, her lips parting, but no sound came out. She glanced at Jacob, confusion flickering across her perfect face. "Wait, what does she mean?" she asked him. Jacob didn't answer. He just stared at me like he was trying to calculate how fast this conversation could destroy his life. I let the silence stretch, the tension wrapping around the room like smoke. And then I decided to take them back to the beginning, because they needed to know exactly who they were dealing with. Before I dive in, feel free to let me know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy the story, a like and subscribe would mean a lot. Anyway, let me tell you how we got here, to the moment my son's wife called me a loser and had no idea that every comfort she enjoyed came from me. 6 months ago, Jacob called me late at night. His voice was shaking. He said, "Mum, I need help. We're short this month. The mortgage is due." My heart ached for him. I had been through hard times myself, raising him alone after his father walked out, and I never wanted him to feel the same fear I had felt. I didn't hesitate. I wired him the money, even though it came from my retirement savings. Just this once, I told myself. But then it became a pattern. First the mortgage, then the car payment, then the credit card bills. Every time I told myself I was helping him get on his feet, helping him build a life. I never asked for thanks. I never wanted recognition. I just wanted my son to be okay. And all the while, Melissa was posting pictures online of shopping trips, spa days, and fancy dinners. I ignored it, convincing myself she must have her own money. Until one day, I saw a picture of her at a luxury store with the caption, "When your husband's mum is still paying for everything, why not?" My stomach turned. I didn't confront Jacob. Not then. I waited, I watched, and I planned. So now, standing in their spotless living room with the scent of expensive candles in the air, I let the truth simmer on my tongue like fire. Melissa's smirk faltered as I slowly walked toward the window, looking out at the street, my back to them. "You called me a loser," I said quietly. In the house my money keeps standing. She flinched. I heard it in the way her wineglass clinked softly against the table. "What are you talking about?" she whispered. I turned back to face her fully, letting the weight of my words hang in the air. "I'm talking about the mortgage, the utilities, the credit cards. For the last 6 months I've been the one paying them, not Jacob, not you, me, the loser." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Jacob rubbed the back of his neck, his face pale. He finally muttered, I was going to tell you. Were you?" I asked, my voice low but steady. "Before or after your wife finished laughing in my face?" The room went silent. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I could feel the shift, the way the air had gone heavy, like a storm rolling in. Melissa's hand trembled as she reached for her wineglass again, but she didn't drink. She just stared at me, her mask cracking. And then, like clockwork, the doorbell rang. None of us moved. But I knew, deep in my gut, that whoever was at that door would change everything. The doorbell rang again, louder this time, slicing through the thick tension in the living room. None of us moved at first. Melissa's knuckles were white around her wineglass, and Jacob's eyes darted from me to the door like a trapped animal. A third chime echoed, and I finally stepped forward. My heels clicked softly against their polished hardwood floor, and for a moment I let the sound fill the silence like a drumbeat in a war movie. I opened the door and froze. It was the landlord. Yes, the landlord. The man whose name had been on the original property papers before I had stepped in with the money to help Jacob buy the place. He wasn't smiling. His hat was low over his eyes, and he held a thin envelope in one hand. "Evening," he said, glancing past me into the living room where Jacob and Melissa sat frozen. "I need to speak with the owners about some overdue payments." Melissa made a strangled sound. "What? That can't be right. Jacob." Her words fumbled and died. I didn't say a word. I just stepped aside and let the landlord in. He walked straight into the living room like he owned it, which, in a way, he almost did. He handed the envelope to Jacob. My son's hands shook as he opened it, and I watched his eyes widen. Melissa leaned over his shoulder, her face draining of colour as she read the paper. "Final notice. Immediate payment required. Property at risk." The room spun with silence. Only the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen reminded me time was still moving. I crossed my arms, my calm steady. "So," I said, my voice cutting like a knife. "The loser keeps your bills paid, huh?" Melissa whipped her head toward Jacob. "You said we were fine. You said everything was under control." Her voice climbed an octave, sharp and trembling. Jacob's jaw tightened. I thought Mom would help again this month." I stepped forward, my voice like steel. "I did. Until tonight. Until she laughed in my face." Melissa's lips trembled, her confidence cracking like thin glass. "Wait," she said, her voice quivering. If you don't pay, we could lose the house?" I nodded slowly, savouring the weight of the truth. "Yes, you could." And then, almost on cue, a memory surged, a flashback to the first time I ever saw Jacob cry as an adult. He was sitting on the floor of his apartment 2 years ago, surrounded by unpaid bills, his hands in his hair. I had sat down beside him, holding him the way I had when he was a little boy scared of thunderstorms. "I'll always be here for you," I had whispered, and I meant it. But now, as I looked into his wife's tear-bright eyes, I realised they had taken my love and turned it into a leash. Melissa started pacing, her hands shaking. "We can fix this, Jacob. We can fix it. She won't let us. She wouldn't." She glanced at me, desperate now. You wouldn't let us lose the house, would you?" I tilted my head, letting the silence draw out until it almost became unbearable. "Would I?" I said softly. "After tonight?" Melissa's lip quivered. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She grabbed it instinctively and glanced at the screen, then gasped. "Oh my God," she whispered. Jacob leaned over. "What is it?" Melissa's hands shook as she turned the screen toward him. It was a notification from her bank app. "Insufficient funds. Transaction declined." Her eyes snapped up to mine, wide and frantic. I smiled. "Check again tomorrow," I said. "See if the loser saved you." And then, for the first time that night, Jacob stood. His voice trembled, but it was louder than I'd heard all evening. "Mom, please, just tell us what you want." I walked toward the front door, pausing with my hand on the frame. I didn't turn around, but my voice carried like a shadow. "I want you to remember this moment. The next knock at that door might not be the landlord." Behind me, I heard Melissa's wine glass shatter on the floor. And then, outside in the cold night air, I saw a black SUV pull into their driveway. It wasn't the landlord this time. The black SUV rolled up the driveway like a silent predator, its tinted windows reflecting the soft yellow porch light. I froze on the front steps, my heart beating slow and heavy, and the cold night air brushed against my face like a warning. I didn't move. I just watched as the engine cut off and the door opened with a deliberate click. A tall man stepped out wearing a dark overcoat. His shoes crunched against the gravel as he approached. Behind me, I could hear the muffled sound of Melissa and Jacob arguing, her voice sharp and panicked, his low and pleading. The man stopped halfway up the driveway and looked straight at me. "Evening," he said, his voice smooth, like someone who had delivered bad news many times and never flinched. "You live here?" I shook my head slowly. "Not anymore," I said, letting my words hang in the air like a riddle. He studied me for a moment, then walked up to the porch and pressed the doorbell. The chime echoed through the house and I could practically feel Melissa freeze inside. A moment later, I heard Jacob's hesitant footsteps. The door creaked open and his pale face appeared. "Mr. Lorne?" Jacob whispered, his voice cracking. Melissa appeared behind him, her eyes wide, still glassy with unshed tears. "Oh no. Oh no, no, no." I stepped to the side, leaning against the porch railing, my arms folded as if I were watching a play I had already read the ending to. Mr. Lorne pulled a folded document from his coat pocket. "We need to talk, immediately, inside." Jacob hesitated. Melissa looked like she might faint. But finally, they stepped aside, and he entered the living room, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. I followed quietly, curious now. Inside, the air was thick with fear. Mr. Lorne laid the document on the coffee table, next to the shards of Melissa's broken wine glass. He didn't even glance at me. His eyes were locked on Jacob. "You're 3 months behind," he said, his tone neutral but heavy. "You were warned. This is the final step before repossession." Melissa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Repossession?" Jacob swallowed hard. I thought we had more time. I was going to fix it." Mr. Lorne raised an eyebrow. "Fix it? With what income? I see here." He tapped the paper. "Your account hasn't had a deposit in weeks." Melissa's face snapped toward Jacob. "Weeks? Jacob, what is he talking about?" Jacob's voice broke. I lost the contract. I didn't tell you because I thought Mum..." He shot me a desperate glance, but I stayed silent, letting the weight of the truth crush him. Melissa staggered back like she had been slapped. "So you let me laugh at her? You let me call her a loser, while we've been living off her money?" The words hit like a hammer. Jacob lowered his head, shame radiating off him in waves. I took a slow breath, stepping forward now. "And you never thought to say thank you, not once. You just took and took until you called me a loser in my own son's home." Melissa's hands trembled as she backed toward the wall. I didn't know." "Oh, you knew," I said softly. "You just didn't care." Mr. Lawn cleared his throat, breaking the silence. If the payment isn't made by the end of the week, the bank will proceed. I suggest you figure something out. He turned and left, the door clicking shut behind him. Melissa slid down the wall to the floor, her perfect hair falling into her face. Jacob crouched beside her, whispering something I couldn't hear. I looked down at them, my heart a mix of sorrow and satisfaction. You have 1 week, I said, my voice quiet but firm. 1 week to show me you've learned something, or this house is gone. I turned to leave, but just as I stepped onto the porch, my phone buzzed. I glanced down and froze. It was a notification from my bank. $25,000 transfer attempt from Jacob's account. My lips curled into a cold, slow smile. So, he was trying to take my money again. I walked into the night without a word, letting the door slam behind me. And I knew this wasn't over, because the next move would be mine. The night air was sharp against my skin as I walked down the empty street, my phone still glowing in my hand. $25,000 transfer attempt from Jacob's account. He didn't even wait an hour. A storm brewed in my chest, not of sadness this time, but something colder. My own son, the boy I raised, the boy I sacrificed for, had just tried to steal from me again. I stopped under the dim glow of a street lamp, gripping the phone tight. No, I whispered to myself, not this time. I tapped the notification and opened my banking app. The attempted transfer was still pending, flagged for verification because of the unusual amount. If I didn't approve it, it would fail. I hit reject, my finger steady. Then I froze the linked account. A strange calm washed over me. He had crossed the line, and I was done pretending he hadn't. By morning, my decision was made. I was going to make Jacob and Melissa face the truth, publicly, if I had to. They had mocked me, called me a loser in my own family, and now tried to rob me blind. I spent the day gathering papers, proof of every mortgage payment I had made, proof of every gift that was really me keeping their lights on. And finally, the deed I had quietly transferred to my own name months ago, when I first suspected they were careless with money. Yes, the house they lived in wasn't even truly theirs anymore. By the time the sun dipped behind the horizon, I was ready. I drove back to their neighborhood. The air smelled like wet leaves and cold earth. In the distance, I could hear music and laughter. Their house glowed warmly, windows lit like nothing was wrong. When I knocked, it took a moment, then Melissa opened the door, her face tight and pale. "You," she whispered. "Me," I said, stepping inside before she could stop me. Jacob appeared from the kitchen, his face flushed. "Mom, listen." I held up the printed bank statement with the $25,000 transfer attempt circled in red. "Do you really think I'm stupid?" I asked, my voice low and deadly calm. Jacob stammered. We needed... You tried to steal from me after everything I've done, after calling me a loser." Melissa's face crumpled. "Jacob, tell me you didn't." He stayed silent. I walked past them into the living room, laying down every document on the coffee table, the mortgage receipts, the bank records, and finally, the deed. "This house," I said, tapping the paper, "belongs to me now. Legally, I own it. And in 3 days, if I want, you will be standing on the sidewalk with your suitcases, wondering where to go next." Melissa's mouth fell open. You wouldn't... Try me." Silence filled the room, heavy and choking. Jacob stared at the floor. Melissa began to cry. Then, the doorbell rang. We all froze. Jacob hesitated, then shuffled to the door and opened it, only to step back as a uniformed sheriff's deputy walked in holding an envelope. "I'm looking for Jacob and Melissa Carter," he said. Melissa's sobbing hitched. That's us." The deputy handed them the envelope. "You've been served." Jacob's hands shook as he opened it, his eyes scanning the paper. His face went grey. "Eviction notice," he whispered. Melissa screamed, a sharp, raw sound. I didn't say a word. I just watched as the walls around their perfect little life started to crack. But then, the deputy turned to me. "And ma'am," he said slowly, "we also need to speak with you. There's been a formal complaint filed against you." My blood turned to ice. "A complaint?" I asked. "Yes," he said, opening his folder, "for financial elder abuse. Someone claims you've been manipulating your own son and daughter-in-law for money." Melissa's tears stopped instantly. Jacob lifted his head, and for the first time all night, he smirked. The deputy's words sliced through the air like a knife. Financial, elder, abuse. I blinked, my mouth suddenly dry. "Excuse me?" He flipped open his folder. "The complaint says you've been taking advantage of your son and his wife financially, using your position and assets to threaten and control them." I stared at him, stunned, as Melissa and Jacob exchanged the most sickening glance, a shared secret, a silent glee. Melissa's smirk was wet with the tears she had just been crying. Jacob leaned back against the doorframe like a man who thought he had finally won. "Sir," I said slowly, keeping my voice calm, "I pay for this house. I have given them money. How on earth could I be abusing them?" The deputy didn't answer. He just handed me a paper. "You'll need to come down to the station to provide a statement within the next 48 hours. If you fail to appear, a warrant can be issued." I took the paper, my hand steady despite the fire building inside me. I looked at Jacob. "You filed this?" He shrugged. "Melissa and I talked to someone. They said what you're doing is illegal. You threatened to kick us out." I almost laughed. Almost. "You tried to steal $25,000 from me, and I'm the criminal." Melissa stepped forward, her voice sharp now, full of venom. "You humiliated me. You came into my home and waved your money in my face. You told me I'd be on the street. That's abuse." I tilted my head. "Your home? Honey, you are standing in my house." Her face twisted red with rage, and for a split second I thought she might slap me. But then she caught sight of the deputy, and the expression melted into fake innocence again. "I think you should go," Jacob said, crossing his arms. "We'll see what the police think about all this. Maybe it's time you learn there are consequences." Consequences. The word rattled around in my chest like a hollow drum. I had spent my whole life shielding my son from consequences, and this was how he repaid me. I picked up my folder of documents from the coffee table, slid the deed inside, and turned for the door. The deputy followed, leaving Melissa and Jacob whispering behind us. As soon as we stepped into the cool night, the deputy glanced at me. "I'm not saying I believe them, but you need to take this seriously. They seemed very convincing." I nodded, my jaw tight. "Oh, I take it seriously. Trust me, officer, I'm not going to let them destroy me with lies." I drove home in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel. Streetlights blurred past like streaks of gold, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. Memories flashed like ghosts. Jacob's first day of school, his graduation, the night he cried in my arms when his first love broke his heart. And now, this. By the time I reached my driveway, my heart was pounding, not with sorrow but with a cold, simmering determination. They wanted a war. They were going to get one. I spent the next day at the bank, securing my accounts, printing records and freezing any joint access Jacob might have once had. Then I drove to the courthouse and spoke to a lawyer, a sharp woman with steel-grey eyes who listened carefully to my story. "They've accused you of financial elder abuse," she said, tapping her pen against the desk. "Do you know how serious that is?" "Yes," I said, "but it's a lie. I can prove everything." "Good, because if they can make it stick, they can freeze your assets and possibly take control of your finances, even have you removed from the property if a judge believes them." A chill ran down my spine, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Then I'll fight. I have every bank record, every receipt. She leaned back in her chair, studying me. I'll represent you. But understand, this isn't just about paperwork. This is about perception. If they paint you as a bitter, controlling parent, it can get ugly fast. Ugly. The word echoed in my mind like a promise. 2 days later, I walked into the station to give my statement. The air smelled like stale coffee and floor cleaner. A young officer led me to a small room with grey walls and a metal table. As I sat down, the door opened, and in walked Jacob and Melissa, hand in hand, faces full of false innocence. Melissa's eyes sparkled with triumph. Jacob couldn't even look at me. The officer set up a recorder. All right, we're going to hear from both sides today. Mom, you first. Tell us why your son and daughter-in-law claim you've been financially abusive. I took a deep breath and began to speak, every word measured, every fact sharp as a blade. I told them about the mortgage payments, the bills I'd covered, the $25,000 theft attempt, and finally I laid the deed on the table. The officer raised an eyebrow. You own the property? Yes, I said. Legally, I can show the transfer paperwork. Melissa's smile wavered. Jacob shifted in his chair. I leaned forward, my voice soft but deadly. They don't want to admit the truth. They want my money. And when I refused to be their endless wallet, they decided to ruin me instead. The room was silent. Then the officer reached into a folder and pulled out a security camera photo. It was grainy, black and white, but clear enough, and it showed me, standing at an ATM, withdrawing $10,000, with Melissa right beside me, smiling. The timestamp was from 2 weeks ago. Ma'am, the officer said slowly, can you explain why your daughter-in-law claims you forced her to make this withdrawal under threat of being evicted? Melissa gasped and covered her mouth. Oh my God, she made me do that. And just like that, the trap snapped shut. The photo lay on the table like a weapon, grainy, black and white, my hand on the ATM, Melissa at my side, smiling, and the officer's voice, calm but loaded, repeated, Ma'am, can you explain why your daughter-in-law says you forced her to make this withdrawal under threat of eviction? I didn't flinch, I didn't blink. I just stared at Melissa. Her hands trembled as she dabbed fake tears at the corners of her eyes. Her breathing hitched in little hiccups of pretend grief. She had rehearsed this. She was putting on a show. I leaned back slowly. You're a better actress than I gave you credit for. Ma'am, the officer said firmly, I need an explanation. I drew in a breath. My pulse thundered in my ears. That money, that was a gift. She begged me to help pay off her credit card debt after she blew it on luxury shoes and spa trips. I withdrew the money because she didn't want her husband to know she'd maxed another card. She asked me to stand with her so she could feel safe. Melissa's mouth opened in a perfect little O of fake shock. That's a lie. Jacob finally looked at me. Mum, stop twisting things. You've been holding money over our heads for years. I tilted my head. Holding money over your heads, or keeping you from losing everything because neither of you can manage a dime. The officer raised a hand. All right, one at a time. He looked at me. Do you have proof of her credit card debt? Any receipts, messages, or statements? I smiled slowly. Oh, I have everything. That night, after giving my statement, I drove home in the dark, my hands steady but my chest burning. Melissa and Jacob had escalated this from betrayal to open war. They wanted to destroy me. They wanted to take my freedom, my dignity, and my home. But they had underestimated one thing. I had records, decades of them. The next morning, I spread everything across my kitchen table. The surface was buried in paperwork, bank statements, emails, text screenshots, credit card bills, mortgage receipts, even photos of luxury packages Melissa had signed for. I was going to crush their lies with the weight of the truth. 2 days later, the police called. I walked into the station carrying a binder so thick it could break a toe if it fell. Melissa and Jacob were already there, holding hands like they were the victims of a tragedy. The officer opened the binder, flipping through page after page. Credit card statements, charges for luxury items. He turned to Melissa. These are all in your name. Her face flushed pink. I mean, he told me to buy those. She pointed at Jacob. Jacob's mouth fell open. What? I didn't… Melissa! The officer's eyes flicked between them, unimpressed. And here are text messages where you ask your mother-in-law for help paying it off, promising not to tell Jacob. The room went quiet. Melissa's mouth moved, but no words came out. Her eyes darted to Jacob, to me, then to the officer. I leaned forward. Tell me, officer, does that sound like I forced her to do anything? Jacob's face was turning red. Melissa's trembling hand gripped his and he yanked it away. Are you kidding me? He snapped at her. You said this would work. You said… Stop! She cried. I didn't know she had proof. I watched them unravel, every second sweeter than the last. But the officer wasn't done. He closed the binder slowly. This helps your case, Ma'am, but the complaint is still active, and until this is resolved, the court will need to review your financial involvement with your son and his wife. I frowned. Meaning? Meaning, he said carefully. They can still petition for a temporary freeze on your assets until the hearing. If they do, you won't be able to access large amounts of your own money. My blood ran cold. Jacob leaned back in his chair, smirking. Maybe we will. Maybe it's time someone else had a say over how you spend your money. I clenched my jaw. He wasn't my son in that moment, he was a stranger. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning. They wanted control. They wanted revenge for being exposed. And now they were going to try to trap me in my own life. I rolled over and stared at the moonlight spilling across the floor. And that's when the decision came to me, sharp and clear. I wasn't going to wait for court. I wasn't going to let them humiliate me again. If they wanted a war, I would strike first. The next day I walked into the bank and requested a full transfer of my savings into a private trust. The clerk looked surprised. Ma'am, this is your entire liquid balance. Are you sure? I'm sure, I said, my voice steady. Within an hour, every penny was moved, untouchable by any freeze order. Then I called my lawyer. We're going on the offensive. File for eviction and prepare to sue for defamation. Her voice was sharp with approval. Consider it done. 3 days later, I stood across the street from my son's house, watching as a court officer posted a bright red eviction notice on their front door. Melissa opened the door, saw it, and screamed. Jacob came running, his face twisted in fury. He looked up and saw me. You're ruining our lives, he shouted across the lawn. I folded my arms. No, Jacob, I'm just taking back mine. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and froze. It was a video sent from an unknown number. I pressed play, and there I was, on screen, my face clear, my voice unmistakable, saying, "If you don't do what I say, you'll be out on the street." The video ended. Melissa's laughter echoed across the yard. "Game over," she said. The video replayed in my hand, the sound of my own voice twisting into a weapon I had never forged. "If you don't do what I say, you'll be out on the street." The words felt like acid. And across the lawn, Melissa's smile gleamed in the afternoon sun, bright and poisonous. Jacob leaned on the porch railing, his face red, his chest puffed. "How does it feel, Mom? To finally lose?" For a heartbeat I couldn't move, couldn't think. The world shrank to the buzzing of my phone in my palm and the hollow laughter echoing from that house. Then my lawyer's voice cut through the ringing in my ears. "They've fabricated evidence, but if we can't disprove it, the court will freeze your assets, maybe even press charges." A wave of fire rolled through my veins. I had lived my life with dignity, built a home and supported my son through every foolish mistake. And now I was being cornered like a criminal. I took a slow breath. No more fear, no more hesitation. 2 hours later, I was at my lawyer's office. "This video," I said, sliding the phone across her desk, "is a lie. They edited it." She studied the clip, her brow furrowed. "The voice matches. But notice the cuts. See the frame glitch. This is spliced." I leaned forward. "Can we prove that?" Her lips curved into a small, fierce smile. "Yes, and when we do, this will destroy them in court." We moved fast. I hired a digital forensic analyst, a man who looked like he could rebuild the internet with a paperclip and a cup of coffee. He ran the video through his software, pointing out the unnatural pauses, the audio distortion, and the mismatched lighting between frames. "They chopped your words from different conversations," he said, "glued them together to make this threat. Classic amateur job." A weight lifted from my chest, but only slightly. "Can you prove it to a judge?" "Oh, I can do better than that," he said, smirking. "I can show exactly which parts they stole, and from where." 1 week later, we were back in court. Melissa walked in first, wearing a cream-coloured dress like she was the innocent lamb of this whole mess. Jacob trailed behind her, his face pale, his hands jammed into his pockets. When they saw me, calm and composed, they exchanged a glance that looked a lot like doubt. The judge called the session to order. Melissa's lawyer went first, showing the video like it was a smoking gun. "Your Honour, here is clear evidence of our client being threatened with eviction unless she followed the defendant's financial demands." Melissa dabbed at her eyes with the tissue. "She scared me so much. I didn't know what to do." The judge turned to me. "Do you have a response?" I stood. "Yes, Your Honour. I have the full, unedited recordings." The courtroom murmured. We played the forensic report on the screen. The analyst explained every splice, every stolen word, and where it came from. Finally, he showed the original clips. Me on the phone saying things like, "If you don't pay your bills, you'll be out on the street. You can't expect me to do what you say." Perfectly innocent phrases, twisted into a threat. The judge's face hardened. Melissa's act crumbled. She shot to her feet, pointing at the analyst. "He's lying! This is all a set-up." "Sit down, Mrs. Parker," the judge said coldly. Jacob muttered something under his breath and slumped lower in his chair. I stayed standing, my hands clasped in front of me. "Your Honour, they have stolen from me, accused me falsely, and tried to destroy my name. I have done nothing but support them, and I am done being their victim." The judge slammed the gavel once. "Complaint dismissed. All financial control remains with the defendant, and I will be referring this matter for review of perjury and fraud." Melissa gasped. Jacob's face drained of all colour. 2 weeks later, the eviction went through. I watched from my porch as movers carried their boxes to the curb. Melissa was sobbing into her phone, begging someone, anyone, for a place to stay. Jacob wouldn't even look at me. He climbed into his car and drove off without a word. As the moving truck pulled away, I felt nothing, no triumph, no joy, just a deep, echoing finality. I went inside, poured myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table. For the first time in years, the house was quiet. Melissa had laughed and called me a loser. But in the end, I had reminded her and Jacob exactly who paid their bills and who held the power all along.